William, hopefully your favorite videographer from Two Hats Publishing. I welcome you to another Two Hats special of community events. Let's look in and see what's really happening.
And good afternoon and welcome to Lambda Weekly. I'm Dave Taffet. I'm here in the studio with Lerone Landis and the late Patti Fink. And our guests today are Suzanne Smith and Aicha Davis. They are both running for State Board of Education. And Patti, did you know what that was?
The State Board of Education? Mm-hmm. Isn't that what they paddle you with?
Yeah, something like that.
Maybe in Texas.
Not
do we still
anymore.
paddle in Texas?
No, we do not.
Yay.
Okay, so first of all, let's just make it clear. What is the difference between an ISD like DISD or Garland ISD and the State Board of Education?
Sure. So the State Board of Education has a responsibility to make sure that everybody in the state of Texas has opportunities to learn. And so they have responsibilities to look at the curriculum that's offered to all public schools in Texas, to look at things like teacher certification requirements, and to oversee our Texas Permanent School Fund.
Okay, so what's an ISD, Suzanne?
So an independent school district is our opportunity at a local level to decide how we want kids to learn. So it's how we actually administer the funds that are given by the state and for our local taxpayers. It's how we actually operate our schools. They make decisions about hiring of teachers. They also decide where we're going to put our emphasis, what kind of choice we're going to give, what kind of opportunities we're going to have. And so they take the federal guidelines and the state guidelines, and they at a local level customize it for individual school districts, individual communities.
So even making that simpler, the ISD builds the schools, hires the teachers, does all that stuff locally.
Bricks and mortar.
State Board of Education sets curriculum, sets graduation standards, and buys the textbooks that the ISDs choose from.
Yeah, I think that's a way to put it.
Yeah. Okay, so
how many ISDs are there in Texas? Quite a bit.
There's a lot. We have a lot of students. We have a lot of ISDs across the districts.
Over 1,200.
Yeah, 1,200. And we've got military ISDs as well.
Just in the state of Texas alone.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
Sure. Well, just in Dallas County, we have a dozen school districts, something like that.
We have a lot. I mean, in my district alone, we have a small school district very up north called Pike ISD, which is very rural, and then we have very urban school districts like Dallas, and then we have suburban like Plano and Richardson. So we've got a wide variety.
And tell us, we don't vote for both of you, so we vote for one or the other if you live in Dallas, Tarrant, or Collin County. So where are your districts?
So my district is 13. It's South Dallas, and it goes into Tarrant County. And so I have Dallas ISD, DeSoto ISD, Duncanville, Cedar Hill, and Lancaster in our southwest area. I also have Grand Prairie, Arlington, Irving, Fort Worth, Birdville, a little of Crawley, and a lot of those little small areas around Fort Worth as well.
So you cross two counties?
Yes.
Yeah. Wow.
Well, and just to back up, the Texas Board of Education is different than any other board in that we've decided at a curriculum level we wanted elected officials to actually make those decisions. So unlike all the other statewide board and commissions that are appointed by the governor. And I think that's a really smart decision because curriculum is something that is nuanced and you want people from across the state really making those decisions. So there are 15 different districts, and so we've got 12 and 13 here. I'm in District 12, and District 12 represents all of Collin County. So a real diverse range of school districts there, and kind of the northeast part of Dallas County. So it includes everything from DISD, so Lakewood, as well as Lake Highlands, but all the way down to Sunnyvale and Garland and Mesquite. So it's a good district with a lot of diversity.
Speaking of Garland,
Yay!
Lerone has a daughter who's in a charter school. Is that a dirty word?
That's a great question. So charter schools, we essentially...
I would never accuse Lerone of doing something deceivious, deceptive, and
So let me give a little bit of backdrop behind charter schools, first of all. So charter schools started in the 90s as an opportunity to give parents options, and essentially said, all of our kids don't need to get a cookie cutter education. We should be able to have choice. So let's give opportunity to the private sector, whether it's a nonprofit or a for-profit, to create these charter schools. And as long as they stay within a certain boundary, they're able to get some public dollars. Most of the time, charter schools supplement it with philanthropic dollars as well. And then they have certain boundaries that they have to follow. So just like with any other system, there are good and bad eggs in that system. And certainly there are very good charter schools, and I think that those should continue. Dallas Can Academy here locally is a good example of that, where kids have dropped out of traditional high school, and now they get an opportunity to get a high school degree versus a GED, which there's a lot of advantages to. But there are also some bad apples in charter schools, and I think it's really incumbent upon all of us to recognize where we are 2 decades later and make sure we figure out policies to pull those bad apples out as quickly as possible.
And I want to make it clear that I wasn't calling Lerone a bad apple. Now, Lerone, why did you choose a charter school?
Actually, I kind of like to say that it chose us. We have a friend of a friend who goes to that school, and they said that they thought Gabrielle would be a good candidate because you do have to get accepted. And so the school teaches in 3 different languages. So she's being taught in English, Chinese, and Mandarin Chinese from day one. So that, my husband is a school teacher. He knows the school system. We did go check it out very thoroughly before we agreed. She got accepted, and they were offering things that the public school that she would have gone to are not offering.
And Aicha, what are some of the good and the bad with charter schools? What types of things? I don't mean specific schools, but...
Yes, International Leadership of Texas does have that trilingual model, and I think that's absolutely fantastic because there's so much research that shows that when you introduce diverse children to different languages, they just grow. So I'm all for that. What I don't like is that a charter school is able to open without so many of the necessities that a regular ISD would have to have, like a library, a counselor, even a school nurse. And so if you exclude things like that from a school, then you exclude children who are able to go there. If you don't have a nurse, you can't have kids that depend on a nurse being on that campus. So
you're
really
saying Lerone doesn't care if his daughter gets sick in school?
Of course
They have nurses, believe you me.
It seems like he's made a really good decision for his own child. But charters are supposed to be open for everybody, but they have little bitty rules that exclude children from them. So they're not as open to all kids as a regular ISD has to be.
So a kid who's like, say, a diabetic, or a kid who needs medication through the day, not just anyone can hand them that medication. You need to have a qualified person managing that.
Correct.
That care for that child. So a kid like that would not be able to go to a charter school that has no nurse.
Right.
That's amazing. And so many kids, I wanted to ask this question at some point, so I'll ask it now. I call her Betsy DeVoucher, but what influence does the federal Department of Education have over what happens to, not just on the State Board of Education in Texas, but to kids in schools in Texas? What is that relationship?
Well, I can give you a specific example of something that's really relevant going on right now in Texas. You have the U.S. Department of Education who said that we weren't doing what we were supposed to do with special education, and that Texas was not identifying all those students, was not giving services to all the students who needed it in special education here. So TEA is really trying to see what can they do to make sure they expand their program so that every student who needs those extra services can get it and they get the education they deserve. And so on that foot, I think that the Department of Education is trying to help education. But Betsy DeVos, I don't think that she necessarily has the best interests of all children at heart. And I really wish that someone would be there to kind of guide her, to help her understand what all kids truly need so she can make better decisions for those kids.
Wait. You want her to go to an inner city school?
I mean, I'm just...
She's just throwing stuff out there.
Not going to happen.
Well, she actually did come and visit Dallas a couple months ago, and she visited a middle school here. She saw some amazing things going on with the ACE program, and she said that she was very inspired to go back and make some positive changes. I have not seen those changes yet. But if she looked at that model that Dallas ISD has, she could probably implement some really good programs.
What's the ACE program?
The ACE program, it helps a school that has been low achieving. It makes sure they have the best teachers and that those teachers are compensated for all the extra time and effort they're going to put into educating these kids.
Wait. Now you're talking about paying teachers.
Yes. Yes. And Dallas ISD.
Patty, you
yes.
booked this, and they're just like radicals, right?
To pay our teachers.
And
Pay our
Dallas ISD
teachers.
has improved
Stunning.
so much. They recently received a B on their state report card, which is phenomenal for such a big
For a
district.
city school.
Yes,
School district.
yes.
Yeah.
And so they've been making great gains. It's so exciting what's going on in Dallas ISD, and that's a great model that can be used across the state and across the country.
Well, let's go back to teachers, because I do think that that's an area where we have a lot of room for improvement in when it comes to the state of Texas, and it's definitely one of the things that hurts our ratings. So what you may not know is even though Texas is 6th when it comes economically, so we're doing great, we've got the Texas Miracle going, we actually are rated number 37 when it comes to public education, and even lower in other rating systems.
Wait. So we're not 49th with Mississippi beating us out?
We actually are, to the point that we made earlier. We're actually making some improvements, so that's the good part, is that Texas is incrementally making changes. But one of the things that we've got to really stand up for in this legislative session, and this is one of the reasons why I say this election is not about independently electing various people who you think are important, but it's a referendum on public education, is we really are at a crossroads. We are not supporting education in Texas the way we did when I was in public education. It used to be the #1 priority for Texas, and now it's not. We're not putting our time and resources into it. And so we can do a great job on the State Board of Education putting 21st century curriculum, but if we don't have a teacher in front of the classroom who's animating it, then we're not going to actually do our job of making sure we actually produce successful young people. So I oftentimes say it's about compensation, but it's also about how we respect teachers. I oftentimes say that if we respected teachers the same way we respected the military, so the military is protecting our democracy, teachers are on the front lines of creating our democracy. And we've got to make sure that we're treating them in the right way, both when they're in the classroom, but also when they retire, and making sure we're protecting their pensions as well as their health care. And that's something we've got to really spend some time on.
Okay, so now she's bringing up all these liberal ideas like everybody deserves health care.
Well, we've made a promise to teachers around health care and pension, and that's one of the things that we said, that when you teach, you actually will retire with a pension, and you'll retire with health care. And we've broken that
don't realize
promise.
this, but teachers are not part of the Social Security system.
Exactly.
In Texas. So to break their pension, which I would never accuse anybody here in Texas in the legislature of trying to do, to do something to their pension means that the Social Security that all the rest of us are expecting, they're not going to get.
Exactly. So to me, that's not a liberal viewpoint. That's actually something where we actually have promised to teachers this is what's going to happen, and we've broken our promise.
And if you are an alternative certified teacher, like you worked in the regular workforce and then you became a teacher, and you paid into Social Security, when it is time for you to retire, you don't get all of that Social Security you paid into, because now you're with the teacher retirement system, and so you're going to lose a little bit of that money. So it really hurts teachers. I was in the classroom over a decade, and those are some of the things we have to worry about, because not only are we getting paid really low, we still have to worry about getting supplies and necessities and resources to all of our kids. And so we do this because we love it. I taught because I love kids. I wanted kids to know as much science as possible, and that's still what I want to do. But it's so much pressure on a teacher to do and be everything while getting paid so little, but some kind of way we figure out how to do it.
I grew up overseas and got exposed to some other kinds of educational systems. But one of the things that struck me when I had a few years in Europe was that so many of those countries so value their teachers that they're one of the highest middle class, highest paid middle class occupations you could have. I mean, the equivalent, if we were to pay a teacher, say, in the range of $100,000 plus, that's a society that says education is important, and the best people would be vying for those jobs. And so, they want those good-paying jobs, and so, the best apply, the best are in the classroom, the best are in front of our kids, and that would just be the way we live. And can you imagine how transformative that would be in our classrooms, in our country, to have people leaving a public school system where they've had the best possible education and going into the workforce and going into leadership.
So, Patti, you're saying, like, when you want to hire somebody, you want somebody who knows how to read
and do math and all of those
know
things.
That science exists.
And science.
It would definitely supercharge our economy if we had that many successful students going into the business sector and various professions, and even in the teaching profession, to make sure that we kind of create that cycle of just continuous learning.
We could go to Mars.
Yeah, exactly.
We need to take a break. This is a good breaking point. You're listening to Lambda Weekly on 89.3 Knon FM. I'm Dave Taffet here in the studio with Lerone Landis and the late Patti Fink. Our guests are Suzanne Smith, who's running for State Board of Education District 12, and Aicha Davis, who's running for State Board of Education District 13. Chances are, if you're within our listening area, most of it, you're in one of their districts. I guess there is District 11. So some people will be in 11. We don't like that one? Or you couldn't get through to her?
Nope, just didn't.
Okay.
It's a small chunk of Northwest Dallas
County. Patti didn't like her. We'll be back with more Lambda Weekly right after this.
This is Rollins Gilliland, and I'm listening to Lambda Weekly on 89.3, and darn glad to be doing it.
And this is Lambda Weekly. I'm Dave Taffet here in the studio with Lerone Landis and the late Patti Fink, and our guests are running for the State Board of Education, Suzanne Smith, District 12, and Aicha Davis, District 13.
Both of you all, Aicha, just before the break, you were talking about you have spent over a decade in the classroom, but I was wondering if both of you could give us a little bit about your background and what prompted you to enter the race.
Sure. I started teaching in Baton Rouge after Hurricane Katrina. I was a graduate student at LSU, and I would volunteer in the schools, and I just would see that it was so many kids who had lost everything. And school was their one place where they can come and they could be a kid again. But they still deserved to learn. They still had a future they had to work towards building. And my major was business, but I knew I had to be in the classroom. I knew I had to be there with those kids, and so I became a teacher. And science has always been my passion, so I started teaching science and engineering. From there, in 2010, I came to visit my brother here in Dallas. He lived in the Irving area, and I visited the schools. I love to visit all the local public schools wherever I go. And I visited Irving High and MacArthur High, and I saw that they had a budding engineering program. And because that was my background, I had worked with Scotlandville High in Baton Rouge and Southern University in engineering. I just had so many ideas, and just talking to the principal and talking to the teachers, I just knew I wanted to be there to help that program build. So I moved to Texas, and I've been here since then. Why I want to run for the state board. Last year, it was brought to my attention that a lot of the science TEKs were being cut. So a lot of the opportunities to learn about science and engineering would just go away.
Because we don't believe in science anymore.
Exactly. And I knew that was unacceptable for our kids. And so I got a couple of teachers together, and I said, hey, y'all, what are we going to do about this? And we went and we testified before the state board. And we told them, you cannot take these opportunities away from kids. And they listened. They listened to every suggestion we made. Not only did they listen to the things we talked about, even deeper, they decided to go ahead and remove the creationism piece from science and put that into other courses where you can really talk about it.
It's in my notes. I was going to ask you, do you believe in teaching that the dinosaurs lived the same time as Jesus?
well, we haven't found any hard evidence of that yet. Mm-hmm. So I like to teach from an evidence point of view. I don't think man was walking beside dinosaurs. We haven't found any fossils side by side just yet.
At least until they got stepped on, right?
But I love kids to be able to explore and think about our future and what we need to sustain the life and be innovative for the things that we're going to need.
You would think in Texas, the home of NASA,
yes,
that we would be at the forefront of all science.
Right.
Right.
You think?
NASA has produced more scientific breakthroughs than just about anybody. We have more Nobel Prize medicine and physics and things like that winners from UT Southwestern here. Why aren't we pushing science?
That's the piece that's missing from the state board. That's why I need to be up there, because they need to hear that perspective. I'm a science teacher. I taught the hard sciences. I taught several different sciences. And I want to make sure that's embedded in our curriculum so that kids have those opportunities to become our next prize winners. So that's just my passion, just giving kids opportunities to learn and be whatever they would like to be in the future. That's sincerely what I've always wanted to do.
You know what's striking to me, and before we get to your bio, Suzanne, you know, these in schools when we talk about science, it's not this like everybody's going to be a rocket scientist literally at NASA. You need science to work on air conditioning units.
Yeah.
You need science to do all kinds of things. You know, and just be able to take care of your car, really.
Well,
you need science every day in your house.
Yeah.
Well, that, but also the scientific method teaches us a lot about how we should use discernment, how we should take a fact base and try out various hypotheses and not to jump to conclusions. So it's really the foundation of our critical thinking skills. And that's one of the reasons why we teach science, is one, we want them to actually learn the science, but we want them to learn the thought process behind science.
Right.
And you, Susan?
Yeah, so I actually grew up in North Texas. I went to Rockwell High School, and then much like your daughter, I loved the opportunity I had in public schools, but wanted more of a challenge. So went to the Texas Academy of Math and Science, which was a dual credit high school and college on the campus of UNT, where I got to be surrounded by a lot of other people who loved science and math and wanted to really make a difference in the world. And so through that opportunity, really recognized that I got a high quality public school education. And so for me, I spent quite a bit of time recognizing that not every kid in Texas got that. So the better part of 2 decades, I've been working as a champion for children, really trying to make sure that throughout all the things we do, whether it's at a city level, a county level, a state level, a federal level, that we have good policy around making sure our children are protected, making sure all of our children succeed. And so one of the reasons why I ran is because I started, teaching, and I was teaching as an adjunct both at UNT and UTA. And I got the wonderful opportunity to sit in front of an undergraduate class and teach, an entrepreneurship class. And those students were coming to me, and they were bright, and they wanted to learn. But what I recognized is that if I gave them a multiple choice test, they could do really well on that. They could figure out kind of the fact-based of things. But if I asked them to discern a current event or understand the pros and cons of a particular issue, or to create, you may be familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, where there's that highest level of the pyramid of synthesis, they couldn't do it. Now, I taught them through the course of semester, so by the time we ended the class, they could do that in spades. But I recognized that our public school education system, because we were so conditioned around the test, we were losing out on the imagination, the creativity, the critical thinking skills, the communication skills that, to me, I got when I got in a public education. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're number 37 in Texas. So that really propelled me forward to do some investigation of, like, why are we where we are? What could we be doing to make sure we're better connecting education with the workforce, and making sure that we really are creating a public education system, not just for now, but for the future. 35% of the professions that exist in the future, we don't even know about right now. And so we're going to be teaching things that, kids, we're going to be teaching things around just basic skill sets that are going to allow them to be successful in the future. And so we've got to be thinking not only about creating curriculum for today, but also creating curriculum so kids can be successful tomorrow.
You know what's really crazy, I think it really ties into this, is we have a new generation of kids who've never not had the internet.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
And connectivity. And I think it's really interesting. I read something recently where, a lot of kids today can't use a map. They can't read a map. Right. And it's not because they can't see where the streets are and stuff, because they can't find themselves.
Right.
They don't know where they are in the map, because all you have to do is press that little arrow, and it has a little pulsating dot on your map. Here I am, and your starting point. So I think it's really interesting, the challenge that presents on critical thinking, on moving forward, is the whole idea that connectivity is with us to stay, unless we have some giant electromagnetic,
So I agree. I think those basic life skills are so critical in public education. They need to be able to do their taxes. They need to be able to write a thank you note. I had to show my students how to write a thank you note. And to address an envelope. Because you're right, when I grew up in school, we had this thing called the card catalog, and we went to this thing called the library.
I remember that.
We
I
didn't
love
have
card
Google.
catalogs, and I love sending things through the mail.
Yeah.
And when you wanted to go find something like really detailed, we had microfiche.
There was an article in the morning news today that 7 of the 15 fastest growing cities in the country are in Texas, and 5 of the 15 biggest population gains are in Texas. We're gaining population really quickly. Is that more an ISD problem, or is that something the whole state needs to address, that all of a sudden all of these kids are coming into our schools, and are we going to be able to educate them?
I think that's a great question. I think the other thing that talks about is there's a quantity difference, but there's also a diversity difference. Richardson ISD, which is in my district, they speak 20 different languages. Back when Richardson first started, or 20 years ago, that was very different. So we're not only having to expand our viewpoint of how do we teach the quantity of kids that we're getting, but also the diversity of kids, and thinking about how we try to individualize and customize and personalize education for all those differences. Even the disabled population. So I was talking with a parent in Lake Highlands who desperately wants her Down syndrome kid to be able to be mainstreamed, but she sees the school district kind of being resistant to that. And we've got to really make sure that we're bringing all of our kids into our schools, being accepting and creating an inclusive environment. So when kids walk in that door, they feel accepted, they feel like they have a place, and they have a voice. And I think that's really where our population growth is going to be challenged. I grew up in Texas. Texas is completely different than when 30 years ago. And I think we've got to have leaders who really understand that diversity and can help usher in what I think is kind of a new way of thinking for Texas.
We have Texas is really known because of our volume, because of our incredible scale of kids in schools. We have a lot of textbooks that are purchased, or because they're made on the market because of our volume. The State Board of Education has a hand in saying this is what we want, the kind of curriculum we want, and so textbook writers and publishers are striving to conform to a Texas standard because of the volume of sales.
Because Texas, we buy our books statewide, and most states don't.
Right.
Yeah.
But because of that, other states end up buying books basically designed by Texas.
Right.
What is that like? What is your role in influencing what goes into a textbook, how it goes into a textbook, what doesn't get put into a textbook? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, the state board does have a direct role in textbook decisions because they do choose the curriculum. For a direct example, to tie in both things we've been talking about, one of the things the state board has been doing to celebrate diversity is starting ethnic studies courses. Mexican American studies was just adopted, and so now kids all around Texas get to celebrate the history of Mexican Americans in Texas. And so in the process, the curriculum is now being decided. So they have a curriculum that was chosen from Houston ISD. They'll look at all the different proposed TEKs, and then from there, they'll be able to choose a textbook what aligns with what they've said what needs to be in the curriculum. So then other states will see, hey, Texas has a Mexican American course. Maybe we should have that. This is a textbook they chose. Maybe we should choose that. So it's so much potential to influence education around the country. So as the state board makes really good decisions about increasing opportunities for kids to learn and choosing textbooks that are aligned with factual learning, then now you can create something that, or model something that other states can pick up on as well.
So let me answer your question about kind of the business model side. So the MBA in me is thinking about this from the point of view of how are we going to keep pace with the technology that's going on. We were just talking about the growth and joking a little bit about the card catalog versus Google, but it's really real. And I jokingly say, we've got to, and I'd love to have a bipartisan commission that we put together specifically on textbooks. One, because every single time we print a textbook, it's already out of date. because we're so much more dynamic as a society now where so many things are changing. And so I think we've got to think differently about how we're thinking about textbooks. We also think differently about the business model behind textbooks. I know in my classroom I actually don't have a textbook because that $90 for that university student is really significant. And so we've got to be thinking about that. We also need to be thinking about, how we actually put information in front of teachers so that they then can take it and run with it. And they don't really have that. TEA right now is putting together a TEACS guide that allows teachers to kind of look at how do you teach various subjects and really animate it into the classroom. Textbooks are one element of that, but it's also the curriculum and also the exercises associated with that particular thing. So I personally think that's an area where we need to use some disruptive innovation. We need to take the pioneering spirit of Texas and really think about how we rethink textbooks in the future.
So, if the state board has that much influence on the textbooks, I've always been curious why there's so many different textbooks for the same grade in the same subject. So, my parents, we moved around a lot when I was a kid. And I would, especially when I moved from Houston to Dallas, same grade, very different textbooks. And I understand they're different ISDs, but it's the same subject.
The state board cannot require that you use the textbook that they've chosen to adopt for a course. Okay. It is highly recommended that you use that textbook, but they cannot require it. So some school districts may choose a book that is similar, but kind of more detailed to the culture of that particular district. So the state board recommendation, it usually comes from TEA, it's research based, it goes along with that curriculum, so it would truly teach you everything within it. But maybe there's a book that has a little twist to it that is a little more aligned with what that particular district wants to have for their own particular kids.
So, if the TEA recommended book is a history book that teaches that slavery had nothing to do with the Civil War, which they refer to as that period of great unpleasantness, they can choose a different book.
They could choose a different book, but unfortunately, a lot of our districts go along with the recommendation of the state board of TEA.
Okay.
And one thing about that, I do want to say that I'm very excited that African American Studies is coming up. It's going to be probably brought up before the state board sometime within next year. And we will correct all of those misconceptions about slavery and a lot of those things that the board put onto the curriculum
you did
years
I was
and years
being
ago.
Yes.
And I hope they also
I got that.
correct the referring to slaves as migrants.
Yes,
Yeah.
migrant
Exactly.
workers. No.
Migrant workers.
No.
Now, Suzanne, one of the reasons you said you were going to run or decided to run was because of one question that, is she the incumbent?
No, so
okay,
it's an open seat. This has been actually, the person who had the seat before we ran, Tynesy Miller, has had this spot for 30 years. So this hasn't been an open seat for a really long time. And so this
Since
gives
I
us
left college, since I graduated from college. she was in
Exactly,
that seat.
exactly. So this is an opportunity for us to have a fresh voice on the State Board of Education.
So we have a minute before we have to go to break, but explain what that question was that irritated you so much.
My opponent, who is actually running in this race, she's from northern Collin County. And so one of the things that I personally believe is that when a student walks into a school, they need to be accepted. Schools need to have an opportunity for every student, wherever they come in from, whatever they are, whoever they are, whatever they choose to be that particular day, they're accepted. And so she was asked a question around LGBT issues, and she was asked specifically around the TEACS. And one of the things that was really clear in her answers, because I think her body language actually spoke more than actually her words, was that she was completely disregarded that particular individual. Mm-hmm. And 9% of our student population are LGBT. And I just don't think you can disregard that population. They need to be accepted into the community. And so I'm going to be working hard to make sure all of our students, whether they have Down syndrome, disabilities, deaf, or LGBT, feel welcome in our public schools. And I just feel like that's something that's a big differentiation between me and my opponent.
And that they can go to the bathroom?
And they can go to the bathroom, exactly.
We're laughing about this. How many shows have we done discussing this stupid issue?
Well, and we should be discussing a lot of other more important things.
Of course. We need to take a break. We're talking to Suzanne Smith and Aicha Davis. Suzanne is running for District 12, Aicha for District 13 of the State Board of Education. That's a statewide commission that does things like curriculum, textbooks, stuff like that, that the ISDs around the state use. We'll be back with more Lambda Weekly right after this.
Hi, this is Valletta Lil, and I listen to Lambda Weekly. I hope that you will too.
And you're listening to Lambda Weekly. We're talking about the State Board of Education, what they do, what they don't do, what they should do. Patty,
I have a question.
Yeah.
In my neighborhood, I'm the election judge, and there's a little elementary school, which is a great school, Hexter Elementary, and they're very diverse, amazing kids. But I feel so badly. I mean, these kids are really small, and they traipse through the auditorium, and they got their backpacks, and the backpacks are like bigger than they are, and you're just going to tip over. I mean, these little 6 and 7 year olds, they're just like, oh my God, and what kind of condition is their back going to be when they're my age?
Patty, you're showing your age. History has had millennium of stuff go on since you were in school.
I know. Well, then they've had to add it all to the books, and
Right.
they're heavier. Do you think there's a day when we would see like an e-reader, and you just put the textbooks on an e-reader, and the kid would carry their e-reader around?
Oh, definitely. A lot of districts are looking into getting digital books and things like those e-readers. Even at DeSoto, they were doing a lot of innovative things towards learning, like introducing e-books and digital books to the kids. Understandably, a lot of schools don't allow kids to use lockers, and they try to take away lockers because of school safety.
Wow.
So that is something that we really have to think about moving forward. How can we still allow our kids to have all the resources they need without those big, bulky backpacks? Because I remember so many days, my back would hurt. I was carrying so many books around.
It's painful to watch
Yeah.
them.
Why are they doing away with lockers?
As just a safety issue. So just as a precaution of, you can have so many things in lockers, from guns to drugs.
Well,
So-
Betsy DeVos is devoting federal money to buy more guns for schools.
Yeah.
We're laughing. I'm not making that up.
I wish you were. But to answer your question, Patty, yes, my child's school, they learn on these things called Chromebooks. All of her curriculum is on there. I think she maybe has 1 or 2 textbooks. Everything is on that Chromebook.
So her back's fine.
Her
Yes.
back is okay.
And that's
Hallelujah.
what I meant about harnessing the pioneer spirit and all of this tech stuff that's going around here in Dallas. So Tech Wildcatters and DEC. If we had that collective energy coming around the idea of how do we help our children learn that much better. In fact, there's a whole group at Southwest by Southwest that's just on education. And how do we harness all of that to figure out how do we get the best material in front of our kids, whether it's a textbook that's a hard textbook like you're talking about, it's an e-reader, it's a blended learning kind of computer program, a gamification of the material. To me, we should be looking at all of those possibilities to make sure our kids learn in the way that they're most comfortable and that puts the content out there in a way that they can best understand it.
I think it's really interesting too. I'm gonna mention the other T word that's just so hated in this state, and that's testing.
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit about the state of testing today in schools? I mean, it's the general perception of, I don't have kids in schools, but I do know that testing is a big issue, and a lot of teachers are teaching to the tests and get these kids past the tests, and it's just an obsession almost with the test. What are your thoughts on testing, and what should we be doing in the future?
I will say that I got to Texas around the same time that the new STAR exams were coming out. And at that time, it was a STAR exam for almost every single course. In order to graduate, you had to pass about 11 STAR tests, which was way too much pressure for these kids. And now it's been reduced. But at the same time, we still need to be innovative on how we're judging how much a student has learned. Grand Prairie has an amazing portfolio assessment where they look at different activities the child can do, different writing samples, different math samples. And from there, instead of just relying on a standardized test, you have a full portfolio of that kid's abilities, and they can move over and build from that when they get to high school and college. I think that's a great way to measure a kid's success.
I agree.
And if people would look at that Grand Prairie model and see how successful it is, because those kids are not necessarily dependent on a test, but they're still successful, then I think we can have a lot of gains in Texas.
And I
Lerone,
think
she mentioned math. I don't believe in math.
You know.
and I think this gets to kind of our love affair with data. And I think we're going to have to wrestle with that in this next decade, because we like the data, but we don't realize what it's doing to our kids and what it's doing to our teachers. So you mentioned something, and the teachers teach to the test. Well, I don't necessarily think they're doing it because they want to. They're doing it because they have to. And I think one of the things we've got to really recognize is teachers are there because they want to actually spark the imagination of kids. And that's one of the reasons why we're losing teachers out of the profession, is because we don't have that anymore. So the testing, so I completely agree with how we do formative testing versus summative testing. So testing all along to see if people are kind of along the way where they're going. But we also have to make sure we recognize that not everything can be studied through a test. You know, critical thinking skills, communication skills, there's a lot of really important things that you can't actually measure through a test. And so we've got to make sure that we're producing happy, thriving, successful kids at the end of our K through 12 experience, and that isn't just about a test.
And in hearing about these tests, I went to school before there was testing. We actually did have tests.
I'm glad you admitted that.
Just a few. But there were very few.
With a quill pen,
Right.
you know, with a feather. When you were in school.
I've always wondered, though, with these tests and teaching to the test, if you just taught your subject matter, wouldn't the kids pass the tests? And if they don't, what are these tests testing? Why are they giving them?
Well, I'll tell you, I remember even in high school and college, but especially in college, when you do something like an LSAT or a GMAT or GRE or MCAT, all those big major tests, you do study to the test, but part of it is about the test taking skills. And some people respond better to multiple choice questions. Others have, like problem solving, story problems and that sort of thing. And that's really different than measuring what you know about biology or what you know about history or what you know about, I mean, some people really perform really well on those tests, and other people who are fantastic and incredibly knowledgeable on what they've learned in class aren't able to translate that into the test, because they struggle like really assimilating what the answers are and having to choose between them, and then the format of the question. And I mean, test taking and testing are two different things. In my view.
No, I agree. So how much of part does the state board play into how many tests that Texas students take?
Because the state board is able to work directly with the Texas Education Agency, they have a lot of influence on those tests. Even with teachers now, there's a new certification exam to become a principal, whereas before you took a kind of bubble-in test, and now moving forward next year, they're going to start a new test where you have a writing component to it.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
And it's
awesome.
going to be a lot more expensive too. And so that's going to cause a hardship for some people who want to move into administration, because now you're going from paying $120 to now paying $500 to get that certification. So a lot of these tests, like I said, they do want to measure how much a child has learned, but at what expense? I think the problem with teaching to the test is the idea that a teacher has to teach all the surface level material so that you know enough stuff to answer these basic questions. Whereas a true teacher wants to deep dive into a subject and let you explore something and come away from it and build a new understanding. You really can't do that if you're required to teach so many mundane facts just to appease a test-taking company. But as we develop better tests through that collaboration with the state board and TEA, we can measure knowledge that really focuses on innovative learning, on what kids need to know to move ahead in the future, not necessarily just small facts that they're probably not going to use a lot in life if they're not interested in that particular subject anyway. So, yeah, it's not a good measure right now of innovative learning and how the kids are going to get to a future level. Just because you make a good grade on your biology exam doesn't mean you're going to be a doctor one day. That's not a measurement of that. So what do we really want our tests to measure?
And I would also encourage folks to pay attention to what's going on in the interim. So we've got a legislative session coming up. And so right now there is a commission, the Public School Finance Commission, and actually Todd Williams here from Dallas, and who's CEO of Commit, is actually chairing the Outcomes Committee. And they put together very specific things that should be done from a testing perspective to curtail some of the testing. I'm a big advocate too in high school of making sure we, instead of requiring some of the ones we do now, the ACT or the SAT, so I think that would be also a better measure, and it also allows you to continue into the college experience. So there are some different tweaks that are being made, and I'm hoping that the legislature will take those under consideration, and more of that will be available in December when the Public School Finance Commission, completes its recommendations.
So we've talked about tests, textbooks, charter schools. Is there any other areas that either one of you all want to focus on should you get elected?
I would say the big one for me, and this is something I've spent the better part of 2 decades working on, is the connection between education and the workforce. So education no longer is kind of a standalone thing where we basically say K through 12, let's try to figure out how you do your best. We now know, because of how the brain develops, that actually what happens before kindergarten is crucially important to how successful a child is in K through 12. So pre-K and 0 to 3 is exceedingly important. So I think we should be doing public awareness campaigns as well as having fully paid pre-K in order to make sure all of our students, when they start kindergarten, are actually ready to learn. And then we continue on that cycle in K through 12, so that in middle school and high school, we're really thinking about their future and starting to, much like some of the other countries that Patti, you talked about, say, what do you want to do? Do you want to be the best air conditioning repair person? Do you want to be the best welder? Do you want to be the best artist? Do you want to be the best doctor? What inspires you? What lights your fire? And then we really create opportunities for credentials and certifications and kind of what is now being called career pathways into their future. So to me, when we finished in 12th grade, you get that high school diploma, and actually that to me is not the end of our job. The end of our job should be, does that child actually go on to college and persist? Do they go on to the military and protect our country? Or do they go on to a living wage job where they're successful? That is the measure of success that I want us to really think about. And so to me, I'm going to be really connecting the dots between pre-K, K through 12, and then ultimately the workforce.
You mentioned pre-K. For years now, I've heard from both sides of the aisle, all walks of life, how important pre-K is.
Absolutely.
Why is it still not part of the regular curriculum as far as having to pay for it? We have to pay for it. We're not rich, but why is that?
So there's a couple of things related to pre-K that you got to be thinking about. So first of all, we've got to move from what we've considered before kind of daycare, which is just kind of making sure a child is safe and has responsible adults around them, to truly an enriched environment, which is through an early childhood center. Right now, we've stayed steady around only 9% of our centers in the Dallas area actually being quality pre-K. We know when a kid, yes,
only 9%.
Only 9%. We know when a kid goes through a quality pre-K experience that they're going to be ready when they start in kindergarten. And that's one of the reasons why more of our ISDs are doing what MBAs would call backward integration and starting to start into the pre-K area. So DISD is starting to put 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds in pre-K. So many years ago, public school districts didn't even provide kindergarten. So I think you're going to start seeing more ISDs providing pre-K themselves, and then partnering with Head Start and private facilities to make sure as many kids get into pre-K as possible. But I'm going to be a proponent, both with my legislative colleagues, but also in the bully pulpit, to say I think Texas should be the first state in the nation that has universal pre-K, where we make it accept quality pre-K, because I think, in my opinion, we would save money in the long run. There's already studies that say when you have that quality pre-K experience, it reduces special ed costs, it reduces remediation, it actually makes the kid more successful when it comes to all these benchmarks we're looking at, so 3rd grade reading levels, 8th grade math, and in college graduation. So to me, it's just an investment and it's a prioritization.
My first volunteer job, the year the Head Start program passed, that's back in the Johnson administration.
And for anyone who is wondering, that's back in the 60s.
It was. I was 15 years old, I think, and that was my first volunteer job, and I did it for a summer. And I can't tell you how valuable the Head Start program was. And I still can remember several examples, and we don't have time, but of kids socializing, in a way that they just did not know how to get along with another kid. Kids who never heard a storybook read to them before. We sat and read to them, and some of the worst kids in the class, as the volunteer, I would just put them on my lap and I'd read to them individually because they needed that. It was so obvious, and here we are, 10, 15 years later, and we haven't adopted it.
You said you didn't like math.
I don't believe in math.
You don't believe in math.
But you're right. It's unbelievable that this program that we know works. I mean, it was obvious the first summer it was in existence. It was obvious it worked. Those kids were just different kids by the end of the summer. So we need that.
And we already know, data has shown, research has shown, that a lot of our kids, especially our black, brown kids, marginalized kids, they're already behind, even at an early age. So if they can get quality pre-K, now you're starting with education as being that great equalizer that it's supposed to be. And so I am all for pre-K for all, because you have some families that don't qualify for the pre-K, but they're not a high earning family. Just the pre-K is just way too expensive for them. And so you have those kids that are going to daycare and they're missing out on that year of being able to learn social skills the way they need to. So that's why that's one thing we have to fight for.
And I think every kid, I can't even think of a situation where a kid that age isn't just gung-ho about something new. You know, kids light up. And I think about education. Every single one of us has a memory of a teacher we adored.
Right.
We adored, who really did make an enormous impact on our lives. And that's so valuable. And hopefully we have many, many memories of many, many teachers. But, you know, it's what we all have them.
I have lots of teachers, but there was one, he was gay, and he was the drama teacher, and he protected all the gay kids. Yeah, he made sure that we were all safe and enjoying school. But I have other examples too of, you know, when people say, "Oh, you have one teacher." I had a whole bunch of teachers that were wonderful. We are out of time. Suzanne Smith, you are running for State Board of Education District 12, which is part of Dallas, northeast Dallas, and Collin County. And Aicha Davis, District 13, you are southwest Dallas and into Tarrant County.
Yes.
Good luck to both of you. And when you're elected, come back and tell us some of the changes that have been made.
Absolutely. We'd be remiss without saying, go make sure you're registered to vote. Go out and vote. There's a lot of great candidates out there. It's a long ballot, so do your research and get out there and make an informed decision, and get 10 of your neighbors to do so as well.
And next week on Lambda Weekly, we have the funky East Dallas Democrats, Joe Sutton, Chrissy Noble, Jill Cochran.
Right.
I'll be away.
Oh, so we'll have a great show.
Good friends of mine. You're going to love them.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, it sounds like it's going to be a fun show. And, you know, I just wanted to give you one John McCain quote that I saw today that was just wonderful. John McCain said, "I will not take the low road to the highest office in the land. I want the presidency in the best way, not the worst way." Sounds like our president, huh?
Let's not go there.
Not at all. Who is doing everything in the worst way. But I just like that quote.
Yeah.
For all of us here at Lambda Weekly, have a good week, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
This is William, hopefully your favorite videographer from Two Hats Publishing. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like it, please leave comments below, or like, follow, or subscribe to us and get notices of all our videos. We love it, even when you call.